This episode was originally a live webinar co-hosted with Holycode back in July 2025.
I see many founders, they're obsessed about having a bunch of fancy tools and they don't stop buying new tools. A spreadsheet is often enough. To track our ARR right now, I do not need a subscription management platform.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Silvan.
Laurent, Thierry, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It's a pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thanks for having us.
Thierry, I want to start directly with you. We met a while ago when we did the Swisspreneur podcast with you. You were still at Bexio. We came to your beautiful offices in Rapperswil. And now you're basically started a new company, Paymira, and you went sort of back to square one. How does it feel to be back at square one as a founder and building a new company?
Oh, it feels great, even if our office isn't as beautiful as Bexio's office. But however, it's amazing. At Paymira, we're building payroll automations for mid-sized companies and scale-ups. And I'm privileged to work with an amazing team. And as you all know, like the first or the early stage of a company is, in my opinion, also the toughest one. But it makes fun, a lot of fun. Anyways, yeah, it feels great.
You're happy to be back. I love that. And we're really glad that you're back because serial entrepreneurs, people like Laurent also did, who start companies and then start other companies. That's the best thing that can happen to the ecosystem. So thank you for doing that, Thierry. I think it's amazing.
Pressure is on.
Exactly. Laurent, you on the other side, you don't need a big introduction. You are basically our resident here with the Swisspreneur Holycode webinars. However, I saw recently on LinkedIn that you went to Belgrade to visit your team. And you put a selfie there, I think, and came back looking rather frazzled. I think it was a pretty intense trip.
Yeah,
what happened? Did you go to the club too often, or what happened in Belgrade?
Actually, this time not. We usually try to go at least once to have some fun, but this time not. There was just so many things going on. You know, when I'm in Belgrade meeting the team, there's probably around 300 of us or 350 of us in Belgrade. So there's a ton of topics I want to condense into 4 or 5 days. And the days start at 7 a.m. and they end around 12 at night. And then, so it was just a lot of topics, but also a lot of good topics, luckily.
That's really intense. How often do you do that a year?
3 to 4 times a year. If I do it more, I would die.
Well, I guess so. It's tough, but it's also fun. So we have a few great topics on the agenda for today. First, operations, then fundraising, and last but not least, finance. Let's start with operations. Thierry, this is a very wide term, operations. It can mean everything, but also not really anything. What does operations specifically mean to you in the startup context?
So if you look at the company as a ship, like I would say the ship is the company, and like your map and your destination is your strategy, and like the engines or the engine room is operations. I think it's operations is what you need to execute on your strategy. And I would say like there's some different areas of operations. I would name the most important ones are like people operations, sales operations, or go-to-market operations. Then depending on the business model, also like product and development operations, and of course, customer or service delivery ops. And we're going to talk later also about like finance operations topic, which is often overlooked in the early stages of a startup.
So there are many different areas of operations. And Laurent, often we hear about an operating system, bring them all together in one way or the other. At Swisspreneur, we use EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. That's sort of our go-to place. I think you're also very familiar with it, Thierry. I see from you nodding. What is your go-to operating system, Laurent? Do you use any specific operating system within your company?
I was not aware of the entrepreneur operating system per se like this, but then when I looked it up, it's actually more or less exactly what we use now after 15 years of being in startups and reading books and having coaching. So yeah, that's basically where we are today. For the people that maybe don't know what it is, the entrepreneur operating system, I think it focuses a lot, Silvan, correct me if I'm wrong, or Jerry, but it focuses a lot around mission, vision, strategy, then OKRs, objectives and key results, and then a certain meeting cadence to keep everyone aligned. That's basically what we've also built, right? So we use mission, we use vision, we use values a lot in discussions, in hirings, in performance reviews as well. And then obviously you have the strategy, you have the quarterly objectives for each team, for each company. And then we have a bi-weekly meeting cadence in most places. Some teams have it a little bit differently, but overall, I would say it's a bi-weekly that we use. And then within that, you have different meeting formats. You have quarterly all-hand reviews. You have weekly or bi-weekly team meetings, retrospectives, all of these things that we use. So it's quite a well-functioning operation, I would say, by now.
I like these two aspects that you just described, right? I feel one is like the vision, the mission, and also the values I count in there, including then the strategy that comes out of it. This is sort of working on the business and not in the business, where you need to know which direction are you heading to with your team and the company. And then the meeting cadence and having one-on-ones and the retrospectives and everything else that you mentioned is more to make sure that you stay in sync. That's then sort of a bit closer to working in the business because you have to align, you have to talk and sync with each other. Jerry, is that a fair summary of the system?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you missed one important part, like the rocks, or what Laurent called the OKRs, like having transparent objectives and results for everyone in the team. This helps a lot to create like transparency, but also like ownership, and is exactly what you need, like to get into execution. Because like it's great to have an amazing vision, mission, and strategy, but in the end, it needs to get executed. And what I really like about EOS, it's really helping a team to execute on your vision, on your mission, and to align the company around that. And yeah, I think when we talk strategy or execution, I think the saying that like 1% is inspiration and 99% is transpiration is right. So I'm definitely an operator focused guy. So tools like EOS really help like to bring things to reality.
So in that sense, the OKRs, the rocks, are sort of the binding glue between the operational part and the strategic part of a business.
Absolutely.
I know we could probably spend 3 hours talking just about these different points, you know, that there's so much content, so much depth that we could go into. But let's focus on OKRs for just a second here, Jerry. How do you set your OKRs? Do you define them as a founder? Is it really like a top-down approach, or do you involve your whole team in like a planning session? How do you come up with the right OKRs that they are in sync with where you want to go as a whole, with your strategy, with your vision, but also accepted by the team who's then actually executing and building and working towards these OKRs?
So we have like the EOS process in place, but like we shorten the cycles because like we are a very small team and we're very early stage. So we're 10 people. And so we do not need to have like a lot of alignment and a lot of overhead. So we really focus on building the product right now. But we define quarterly company objectives within the management team. So we've set our yearly goals for this year. So we're gonna launch the MVP this year. This is like the overall target, and then we break it down into like quarterly objectives and the product roadmap, and then the team has to figure out, okay, what is like my contribution to this company objective. And yeah, then usually this process takes less than a week. So we have on Monday, we discuss the company objectives, and then they discuss it within the team. And a couple of days later, like we have the whole set of of objectives for the whole company. So if I look back at Bexio when we were like around 150 people, of course, like this whole process has another dimension, but we do it pretty straightforward. And also I would say it's like, it's quite top down in these days, as we do not need like, we are very aligned. So it's more about like, okay, someone has to structure it in a way that we can just like continue executing.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, from the 10 people team, Laurent, I think you have multiple hundred people working at Holycode. How do you do it there, setting the right OKRs or rocks?
I think, as you say, or as Jerry also said, if the team is bigger, it becomes more complex, right? So when I was at Bexio after Jerry, I would say there's a way you do it in good times and there's a way you do it in bad times. And in good times, let's say at Bexio, the way we did it was the team would come up with OKRs that were brought into management. Then management would define what are the yearly OKRs that we want to go after out of these ideas, bring it back to the teams, and then the teams could give their final input. But in the end, that was more or less it, with a couple of suggestions. And then on the quarterly base, etc., they could then set up their own OKRs within the team without management approval. That's the good time scenario, right? The bad time scenario, which at Holycode, I mean, the last 3 years have not always been easy when we started here. So I would say the first 18 months, it was much more, let's say, stormy times. And then I think we turned it around. Then it's really more of a top-down approach. So we as a management, based on what we knew, came up with OKRs that we think are really relevant for the company. The team was able afterwards to give input, but there was no, integrating all of their ideas in the first place, because it's just at the point of as a company where you just need to execute against a few things and everything else does not matter at that point. Now that the times are a bit better, we changed it again. Now again, the team brings up their ideas, management collects it, creates the yearly OKRs, goes back to the team to get their feedback, then sets them in stone, communicates them, and then the quarterly OKRs each team does by themselves, with me double checking for every team whether they are really aligned with the methodology and our yearly goals at this point. So it's a bit of a mix.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting to learn how this works at different scales. Jerry, once you have the OKRs, then it's also a matter of keeping track of them, making sure that usually it's a quarterly time horizon, that you give yourself time to execute on them and to achieve them or get at least closer to them. How do you check in along the way? How do you make sure that you stay on track and you actually deliver what you set out as an objective?
So we have weekly check-ins where we go through all the objectives. And if something is off track, like we raise an issue and we discuss, okay, what has to happen to be back on track. So we do on a weekly basis. And then we have once a month, we have a team meeting where we also do demos, and like the engineers, especially, they show like the results of their work. I think these are like the two most important meetings to keep track. We write down everything in Notion, so you can log in anytime and see how we're doing.
So you're fully transparent in that sense. I think that's a really key part, that people see, oh, here's something off track, and then can already take action without having you telling them, basically.
Absolutely. And I think it's also like, it's part of our culture, like if something is off track, this happens all the time. It's not about blaming someone. And I really encourage people like to come early if they feel something is gonna break or it's not gonna happen, because I can't help them if it's hidden somewhere. And I often see that some people who are not familiar with this type of culture, like they try to find a way why they are on track, even if they're off track. And so I think like culture is also an important part of how you implement and use these tools across the company.
Yeah, it's really about accountability and ownership in that sense.
It is.
Own your OKR. Yeah.
We always tell the teams the goal is to use as least possible initiatives or tasks or projects or whatever you call it to reach your goals. So be lazy. The most lazy person in the company wins, because if you can achieve your goal with only one initiative, you've actually saved yourself a lot of time, right? And for that, you need to be brave in saying if something is not going in the right direction, or you need to be brave to call bullshit on stuff that you think doesn't make any sense. It's really difficult to instill that into everybody, but yeah, there's a couple of people that are just amazingly good at that, at being so lazy to the point that they're the most effective in the company.
Well, if they get the job done, you're happy, right? I guess that's what counts in the end.
Exactly. It's a positive laziness. It's not a bad laziness, right? So, yeah.
So, Jerry, I heard you have the demos basically of the engineering team. You have the check-in. Where do we stand in terms of the rocks? Do you have any additional meetings that you take, like a leadership meeting or anything on top of that runs on a regular basis?
No. So we like the management meeting is also like our level 10 or our weekly check-in meeting. I have one-on-ones with my direct reports. But at the stage we are right now, like so much communication is happening at lunch when we grab a coffee, or so that we do not need the one-on-ones that often. But what is very important is like from the beginning to build like an infrastructure to measure certain things, like, because like I'm very data driven, and so we invested from the beginning in a proper CRM setup. We track everything. We have analytics in place. We do structured also like research and user feedback. We try to have access to all the data to track progress, but also to make decisions as we progress. Because like in the early beginnings, we're looking for product market fit, right? So we really need to fail fast, and to know if we're failing, we need data showing us that we're going in the bad direction. And we're also setting up like a proper financial reporting from the beginning, because I know if you implement that later on, it's much harder. You do not have to have an SAP in place or so, but just like what are like the three most important metrics you want to have a look at. And that's like also part not of EOS, but of course like my management operating system is having access to the data to take the right decisions.
I'm very curious about that, because in EOS, you also have like the scorecard, I think they call it, to check the KPIs.
Yes.
Two questions here. A, what are the top 3 KPIs that you focus on at this very early stage that you're at? And second, where or how do you track them? Did you build your own dashboard? Do you use any software to visualize, to track everything in one place? How do you keep track of everything the right way?
So the most important KPIs for us right now is like, of course, sales. Okay, is there someone willing to buy our service? And then we track a lot of KPIs, like from user interviews, from demos, from usability tests, and then also like the conversion rates along the funnel. So if 8 out of 10 usability testers want to discuss an implementation of the software, that's a good sign. If it's 0%, it's a disaster, right? So we also define KPIs along the customer journey we're currently building. And we have HubSpot in place for certain things, and for others, like a spreadsheet and some automation is often enough, especially in the early days. I see many founders, they're obsessed about having a bunch of fancy tools and they don't stop buying new tools. A spreadsheet is often enough. Track our ARR right now. I do not need a subscription management platform.
That's why I wanted to ask, because I often feel that we have a tendency to over-engineer stuff, and then we spend so much time and energy of getting the right tool perfectly set up, but we forget that in order to get data in there, we actually need to build a product and make sales. Otherwise, you will have 0 data in a beautifully set up tool. It's useless. So I really like that you say the pragmatic spreadsheet is enough approach. Laurent, back to you. We now talked about the meeting cadence. We talked about the OKRs and the rocks. One thing that I'm really curious about, we also quickly talked about vision and mission, sort of including with the strategy to have this sort of working on the business part. As you grow the company, you probably can't repeat those often enough to make sure that everybody knows where you're heading, that everybody knows what your values are, etc. How did you experience that with the growth of Holycode to still keep people on track and sort of identified and in sync with your mission, vision, and values of the company?
I think that's a very difficult thing to do in any size of company. But as you grow, the distance between you as one of the founders that really brought in these values and the mission, and some of the employees obviously grows bigger, right? There's level of reporting in between. There's maybe also geographically you're not in the same place. So it becomes very, very important that all the levels in the company that you interact with, they also use this as much as possible, right? And I think the best way to do that is not just have the fancy pictures of the values on the wall and all these things, right? But that's part of it. So let's say the easy parts are have the values, the mission, the vision hanging up in your office everywhere. Make sure they're in your presentation. So for example, any internal presentation we do, the first 3 slides are always the vision, the mission, and the values, right? And we force our management teams that are presenting to not flip past that or to say a half-hearted sentence about it, but to every time really read the sentence that's on there and give 1 or 2 sentences on why today that is important to them. Like really just make it a practice everywhere. And then personally, what I'm trying to do whenever I can is in each meeting, when we need to take a decision, and I think I've talked about this also before in one of the podcasts, I really try to bring it back to the values or to the mission. Say, how is this decision going to impact us building the technology for the future? Or how is this going to impact our transparency value? Is that in line, right? So by really asking the questions about the values and the mission while making hard decisions, you get people to start using it more and think more about it. And then we use it also in the performance reviews. So in the yearly performance reviews, we're a bit old school. We still do yearly performance reviews. Part of the reviews is rating the team members on their adherence with the values. So 0 to 5, how well have you done on living up to our values that we have as a company? And if you're not doing good on 4 out of 5 values, sorry, actually now 3 out of 4, because we only have 4 now, you're at risk of leaving the company. So we make this a very integral part of our reviews. Yes, performance is important, and yes, everything else is very important, but you need to live up to those values. And I think by implementing this, we get to a good level of adherence with our values and our mission, but I still think we need to do better. So any ideas out there, bring it to me.
I feel that's the crucial part, right? You have to bring this topic up over and over again, and not only with the posters, but actually reasoning from a value standpoint why you hire or fire someone, or why you sort of reward a certain behavior because it's in sync with the values that you want to see in your company. That's the crucial part. Jerry, if we sort of go back there to the EOS system, I think there's something called like right people in the right seat, where they also do like a value rating, right? To a certain degree.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like what Laurent said is very important, like especially when you grow as a company, like to really focus on the value and how people behave according to your values is super important. At Bexo, I always try to celebrate good behavior in public. Like, so if someone really went the extra mile for a customer, so really sat down, helped, like if someone from product really helped the customer care team to solve a really hard issue, I will bring up that example in the next all-hand meetings to really see, okay, this kind of behavior is what we need. It's like this guy has been a role model by doing that. And so I think that was for me also an important tool, like to showcase, okay, what does it mean to live and execute according to our values? Just like to bring up some examples from the daily work your teammates are doing.
Jerry did an amazing job there, because when I joined Bexio after him as the CEO, those were big shoes to fill, because even in management meetings or in other meetings, people would say at certain points in the meeting, you know, Jerry would have now said that we should look after this and this from a customer's perspective, or Jerry would have said. So it was very clear that Jerry had built with his other founders a system or a team where people were using a certain way of thinking about it. So, I mean, Jerry, I've never told you that, but that in the beginning, it was really impressive to see for me that, you know, the team really had this way of looking at what would Jerry have done and how would he have thought about this? And he would have seen this through a customer's lens that I found very impressive. So even if it was a 150 people company at that point, you somehow managed to instill that into them.
That's super impressive. Did that also make your job harder, Laurent? Because you were not Jerry anymore, coming as the external CEO, so to speak.
Yes and no, because the thing is, it helped me very quickly realize that just trying to be Jerry 2.0 is not going to work in this company, because he just did such a good job. I would fail at this. So it was very clear to me, I have to be myself. I have to bring my own brand, and I have to do it in an authentic way. And I said to people always very quickly, like, look, I'm not Jerry. I don't know. I don't have all this history. You have to explain stuff differently to me. Maybe I will take different decisions. So I was just trying to be very curious and interested in the way that they do their business, very people oriented, but bringing my own way of doing it. And I think that it also worked out well. It was different to what Jerry did, and it's a different setup when you come in as the external guy with 150 people that were basically hired by Jerry. But I think by not trying to imitate what Jerry was doing, because I could not have done that, it was easier to find my feet and help the company on its growth trajectory afterwards.
And you did a great job, Laurent.
I'm sure you did. Yeah.
Yes,
Authenticity
yes,
is the
I know.
key.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So enough of the bromance now. Let's dive deep into the other topics again.
Exactly. I wanted to say, let's switch the gears to the fundraising topic. Jerry, you raised about 12 million, if I'm not wrong, with Bexio in about 4 rounds. And often fundraising becomes a full-time job for a CEO or a founder, basically, of a company. Did you experience it as like, okay, I have to run the company, but there's like a second full-time job, which is called fundraising on top of everything else that you were doing?
Yes. So actually we raised more than 20 million at Bexio, and I spend a lot of time raising funds. I was lucky to have board members who always told me, look, we're going to raise funds and you're going to do nothing else. And you really need to make sure we're not going to lose any traction. So sales has to be in top shape during fundraising, and everything else, you do the fundraise. That's it. And I would say one very important decision was to hire a CFO right before we started raising for the Series A. So he was kind of my wingman. So he was not, I was still the guy selling the company to investors and doing the fundraising, but he was the perfect wingman. So he prepared all the documentation. He took care of the data room. He built the financial model. He polished the slides. And this helped me a lot to really focus on like the investor relation, but also to run the company, because like you still need to be visible and valuable and approachable within the organization. And then I think another important part is to not become like a bottleneck in your daily operations. I often see early stage founders who are highly engaged in sales. Of course, I'm also very engaged in sales right now. But as soon as you start fundraising, you need to make sure that like your sales pipeline isn't collapsing, because like that's the worst case. You're fundraising and they ask, okay, what are the current numbers? And they all go southwards. And that's like a disaster. You really need to prepare for that. And also like to try to organize the go-to-market and everything to enable you to raise funds, because like you will also, especially in the hard times, you need much more time and resources to raise a round that you like to.
And I mean, you want to keep the momentum. That's why the sales part is so important. CFO, I get it. The CFO helps you to prepare everything, to have your back in that sense. But how did you set up the sales part to not have dropping numbers when you were so busy switching from selling less probably to selling shares of the company in that sense?
I think seasonality is one aspect. You can, depending on the business model, of course. But like at Bexio, it's still the case. Bexio sells like twice as much between November and March. So that's a thing we considered. On the other hand, especially in the very, very early stage, it's often hard. Like you have one CEO, he's the only sales person and the only person who's there for fundraising. So then you just need to do both at the same time. But as soon as then your company grows and is preparing for Series A, it's just about having people to take care of everything else, really, to have like maybe a founder associate or a similar role who's only there like to enable you to be much more productive and to focus on the important stuff.
I think getting away from founder-led sales as early as possible in the journey is super important. By that, I don't mean that you as a founder should not be doing sales anymore, because you want to do that. It can give you an extra kicker. It's a bit of an insurance policy against bad sales performance as well. And especially it helps you understand really what the client wants, how you found your product market fit and how you grow it. But you need to get away from founder-led sales as early as possible on the journey, because what if you have an accident, or what if you're stuck in a financing round that takes longer? It cannot be all on your back, and that's super difficult to do. But yeah, I think it's one of the key things in the early stage to get it right.
Jerry, what would be your recommendations to get away from that founder-led sales? Because you have two advantages, right? One is you are the founder, you are the CEO, so people love buying from the founder or CEO, or at least taking a meeting with you. So you have a bit of a joker card in that sense. And the second one is you have so much implicit knowledge that is simply probably not everything is documented the right way in the beginning. So it's really difficult for someone to be able to compete with you early on as a founder when you do sales. How did you manage that transition to get away from founder-led sales?
You need to hit initial product market fit as soon as possible, because like I think that's like the secret power of a founder is like to be able to do sales, but also to understand how you need to build a product while doing sales. Here at Paymira, we started doing sales before having a product, and I think this would be very, very hard for like typical salesperson. But as soon as I see like, okay, we haven't changed our messaging on a weekly basis, our positioning, our ICP becomes much clearer. I see a certain degree of repeatability in our sales motion. This is the moment when I should hire someone. And of course, this person should be a fit in the current stage of the company. So maybe not a top AE from Salesforce, but someone who feels great with this high level of an uncertainty and a little bit chaotic way. But I think getting to repeatability, having positioning and messaging in place is like what you need to enable others to do sales.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense when you describe it. Laurent, back to you. I have a follow-up question there. You have built multiple companies, you have raised funds, you have exited companies. Is it easier to raise funds if you're a second, third, or even multiple times founder? Is it getting easier to raise money from investors?
Yes, that's the
very
simple
simple
answer. I mean, for a lot of reasons. The first one being, obviously, I mean, in Switzerland, it's also depending on how successful you were. Let's say in America, that doesn't count for that much. You can also have failed 4 times and still investors would be more likely to give you money, because failure culture is being seen a bit differently there. But overall, it's you've built a network in your first or second or third try. You've probably built a followership of investors that actually profited from you and would be more than willing to look at your next deal. I'm not saying investing. They usually say they will, but then they look at it and then it still has to work out. You've learned a lot along the way. So the way you present your second, your third, or your fourth company is going to be much better than the way you've probably present your first company to the first investors. You can maybe even bring in your own money at the beginning, which makes it a little bit easier to get to a certain point where you can convince investors easier that your product is actually worth investing into. Like, there's a ton of other things that are connected with it. You will also build a better team usually if you found the second or the third time, because you have more experience. You can bring on more experienced people from the start. So there's a ton of reasons why this is the case. But yeah, absolutely. So, serial entrepreneurs or second or third time founders will have an easier time raising money. It's not easy, but it's easier.
I like that. Not easy, but easier. Perfectly said. If anyone has a questions to these guys here, to Jerry or Laurent, about operations, fundraising, or funding, just drop them in the comment and we will pick it up at the end. Just a quick plug for anyone who would like to also ask a question here in this round. Jerry, back to you. We talk about fundraising, but the first question you actually have to ask yourself is, when does it actually make sense to raise money? Especially these days, there's a big discussion going on of, do we even still need investors? Should I still raise money or just try to bootstrap as long as possible, leverage AI to get more done with a small team? What is your take on that? When does it make sense to raise money? And is that changing in any ways today compared to when you built Bexio?
No, I think it's going back to the days we've built Bexio, because when we started Bexio, it's more than 10 years ago, fundraising was really, really hard. And then, like, I would say in the years 18, 19, 20, 21, like VCs invested in almost everything, also in a lot of non-VC cases, and a lot of companies were funded who just don't have a business model for venture investment. However, I think that's going back to normal. And like AI, you mentioned AI, is also changing the game a little bit. But I don't believe in this, okay, we're going to see soon the first one person 100 or 100 million ARR company. I think that's going to take more time. But however, in the end, it really depends on two things if you should raise funds. First, on your business model. So what are you building? So a venture investor typically looks the 100x potential, because like they do a lot of investments, a lot gonna fail, and these investments work out, should like return the whole fund and on top some proceeds. So and the second thing is like the market. What is like the potential to match the return expectation of a venture fund or an investor? And if you let's say LLMs as an example, like they require huge upfront investments, but they have a huge return potential, even if the business model isn't that clear right now. But it's clearly a business model where you need to raise funds, right? But if you let's say you build an AI consultancy or an agency consulting SMEs on implementing AI tools, you can just start if you have a computer and that's it. So you don't need big upfront investments. You can bootstrap it easy. Of course, the business model is, in terms of scaling, has some limitations. You will also always need to hire more consultants or whatever. So it's not like it's not able to scale globally and also not rapidly. Or we talked a lot about Bexio. Bexio is also a business model where we needed a certain upfront investment to build the software. And then like a software as a service business model selling subscription is also like the characteristics that as soon as you start growing very fast, you burn a lot of cash, right? So as the faster you grow, the more cash you burn. And because you're selling subscription. So if I pay $500 to acquire you as my customer, and then you pay me $50 a month, I need 10 months to recover my customer acquisition costs. And I need to bridge that time with cash. And this is also why certain business models, they don't work in a bootstrapping way. They need funds. And I think these are like the most important things you should look at. But then you should also ask yourself as a founder, do I want to have others on my cap table? Because like an investor isn't just someone who gives you some money. They have a strong opinion what you should do. And I remember when the first company I've built was an agency, we bootstrapped it. And at one point we said, okay, next year we don't going to grow that fast because like we need to consolidate a little bit. And someone wanted to make like 2 weeks more of vacation. And so it's like, okay, that's just like, but that's not going to happen if you have a VC on the board, right? Because
no way, yeah.
Never, ever. And so it's also like a personal decision. If you feel comfortable having others on your cap table, on your board, and you're not the only owner of the company. Like you're, in the end, in a venture case, like the founder CEO is a small minority shareholder, of course, a very powerful one, but it's not your company. So I think that is something you should also consider.
And I think, so I always say that as well. I mean, everything Jerry said is obviously spot on, but I also think you can always change from bootstrapping to getting investors if you have a good business that is investable, obviously, but it's almost impossible to go from a company with investors back to being, bootstrapped and running your own way. So this is a one-way decision, and be really careful when making that you're up for what's going to come your way once you walk through that door, right?
Very good point.
Last month, we also had a really good discussion with Nenad, with your co-founder, Laurent, and he said people often think that they will work less because of AI, but actually that's not true. We thought the same when the computer came along, and your output will actually have just more leverage. So in the same amount of invested time, you can get more stuff out, basically. And if we think about that from a fundraising perspective, that's also really interesting, right? Some people say you don't need investors anymore, et cetera, et cetera. That might actually not be true. It might be the opposite, that if there's a bigger leverage with AI in your company, proven to be true, of course, because there's also a lot of hot air out there, your invested capital then comes with a bigger leverage. So your returns might be even disproportionately bigger than before AI. What do you think about that?
That could be. I mean, that could be in the end. I think money is fuel to grow faster, right? That's all it's supposed to do. Investment money. It's supposed to help you grow much faster to capture more market share. So if by using AI you can grow faster, and by deploying more money towards that, you actually can grow even faster. If you can, I don't know, right? That depends on the business case. I think it will fuel this even more. That's definitely the case. I don't agree 100% with Nenad there. We have these disputes a lot lately, not in a bad way, but I listened to Andreessen Horowitz podcast where they said the software development industry is a 3 trillion market globally. 3 trillion software development. I think we have 16 million developers worldwide. So their assumption is AI is going to make all of them 50% or even more productive. So basically what they're saying is we will unlock another 3 trillion value in the software development industry that we can then assign into creating more valuable companies. Great. But are we realistically believing that in the next couple of years, we can build 3 trillion worth of businesses on top of what we have today by using AI, right? I think that's where it becomes philosophical. And that's where Nenad and I differ a little bit in opinions, because he says, yes, humans are creative. We'll figure this out very quickly. And I'm usually saying it takes longer. It's a bit slower. You will be more productive, but we will need less people until we actually catch up with the growth of the economies and everything. So we have differing opinions, and it's a bit philosophical, but yeah, I think it's the same for investment into AI companies. Some will go off like rockets. The majority will not profit that much from it, in my opinion.
I'm really curious, but that sounds like a very healthy discussion that you have there between you and Nenad. So I'm curious to get Cherry's take on that.
I'm more on the Laurent side. Optimistic, but I try to stay realistic. At the same time, we're working a lot with AI. But I also see the current limitations, and it will take more time than we expected. It's always, I think it's always the same when we have like a new breaking technology. But the potential, I think it's really hard now to see what will change in 10 years. So I think we underestimate what's going to happen in the long term, but we overestimate what's going to happen in short term.
A classical human fallacy in that sense. That's just how we are wired. Let's briefly talk about the last topic as well. We covered operations, we covered fundraising, and everything sort of comes together when you look at fundraising and operations in the financial department, right? Laurent, when was the point when you guys were like, okay, now we really need to get serious about our finances? You brought in someone, you outsourced it. When was that point when you realized, okay, we have to have the house in order there?
Oh, man. Yeah. So I would say this has been one of the only mistakes I've done repeatedly as a founder. I mean, I do a lot of mistakes, don't get me wrong, but I tend to not make the same mistakes too often. But getting finance set up properly has been a curse. I've always done it too late because I felt I can cover it myself up to a certain extent. And it always ended in partially a disaster. So at Movu, for example, it took us, I think before we sold the company, like 3 months before we finally had a CFO. Like, that's a bit late in your journey to come up with a CFO. So that was not great. Also, we were factually 4 times bankrupt because I was the CFO and wasn't probably doing the best case. the best job in managing this. And at Holycode, we just hired a group CFO 7 days ago. So after 11 years of running the company and 420 employees, we now finally have a group CFO that actually is a CFO and not my nose that is pretending to be one. So this has been one of the things I've gotten wrong too often, because I always looked at it as a cost. Like, okay, you add a CFO, that's an expensive person. They're not really adding that much, productive value. But I think that's the wrong way at looking at it, right? What they do is they reduce a lot of the risks in your business. They can make sure that your cash flow is more positive, and cash is oxygen to any startup. And they just take a lot of things off your table that are in theory catastrophic, but not very likely to happen. But still, someone needs to make sure that these things are not going to happen to you, right? So yeah, this has been a very clear mistake I've been doing in the past up until now. And I very clearly see it now after last week's hire, that this is something you should address much earlier. The way that Jerry talked about it before, I think, is much better. Set up your finances as early as possible. You might not be able to have a CFO in place at that point, but at least have then either a setup where you have an accounting company that is really good at being a fractional CFO or stuff like that. I mean, there's so many options today that 10 years ago were not really available, that I think it's just bad management if you do what I did, honestly.
I really appreciate your honesty and your reflection. I think that's something that we can learn a lot from, mistakes that other people make. And then they say, okay, I don't want to do that. Jerry, what are the consequences if you don't have your finances under control? I know the worst case scenario is probably you go bankrupt and you have to close shop. But what are the real things that can threaten your business in that sense when you don't have your finances in order?
Most founders when they think about finance, they think about accounting. I have to do it because I need to file taxes, and it's just like mandatory. I need to do it. And the other part of finance is cash collection. So I need to send invoices to get cash. That's also important. But there's much more. So because to really understand your ROI of certain things you're doing, to understand if you're wasting money in marketing or not. That's it. It's my favorite example. You need finance, and you need a proper setup to understand if your KPIs are in good shape or not. You need finance. You can't calculate proper CAC without finance. To understand your customer lifetime value, you need finance, and you need proper or good KPIs to raise funds. And so what also can happen if you're not on top of things, you lose trust within your investors, you lose trust within your board, you take the wrong decisions, you're not able to challenge your management team as you should. Owning the business plan is really a core aspect of your role as a CEO, and you can't do that without having your books up to date.
Fully. And there are many tools out there, right, that at least help you to get started. Maybe they don't fully replace your CFO, but they get you started. Bexio is one, of course. Paymira that you are working on right now, Infinity, a newer software. There are many tools out there that help you. How do you find your right tool stack to get started in the early days? Because you probably want to do some stuff yourself, but you also don't have the full money to maybe hire someone full-time, as Laurent just described.
First, people solve problems, not tools. So in the beginning, what we did here at Paymira, we outsourced everything. So we have an external accountant, fractional CFO, call it how we want. But we work on Bexio, of course, but I just approve payments, and that's it, right? And of course, as sometimes I have to scan or submit an invoice, but I'm not doing the bookkeeping myself. No one in my company should waste time taking care about bookkeeping. So I think before you choose a tool, think about, okay, what information do I need to run my business? And then where do I find an external person, accounting firm, whatever, to help me? And then if now the guy I'm working with would have told me I'm going for Bexio or Infinity or whatever, I don't care. I don't care, because like what I need is like, that's the structure of the P&L. These are the KPIs I want to be able to track on a monthly basis. And I need this input from you as an accountant. That's it. Important, think about, okay, what you might need in 12 months or in 18 months. Because like we could have started with the spreadsheet right now, but I know this would break in 12 months latest. And then to clean it up, this would be very expensive. So this is like my advice when it comes to tools. And if an accounting tool, I think Laurent would agree, Bexio is probably a good solution, I guess.
That's the way to start, obviously.
No, I think it's very nice, like this practical view of what you need and how you should think about it. I really like that approach. Guys, I think we could go on for another hour, but we're almost at the top of the hour. So I have one last question for both of you. Let's start with you, Laurent. Now we talked about 3 different disciplines, right? Operations, fundraising, and finance. If you had to choose one of them to focus on and to say, this has the single biggest impact on the success of my business, which out of these 3 would you choose, Laurent?
Operations. It's the engine of your company. If this doesn't run well, you can have the best finance guy. He's just going to tell you to cut costs. You can do as much fundraising as you want. Nobody's going to invest.
Spot on. Jerry, what's your take on this?
Operations, 100%. It's the only execution is the only thing what matters.
Very well said. Guys, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time today. I hope you inspired many people with your experience share. And I really appreciate you coming here live with us today. Thank you for your time, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.